Today, I want to offer a few reflections on St. Joseph, the boundary crosser. A few of the most meaningful boundary crossing experiences for me have included ecumenical and interfaith engagement. I'd never heard the word ecumenism before I started my studies at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa. My Catholic education in a predominantly Catholic space had left me under the impression that most people were Catholic. My freshman year at Luther College, several of my close friends were disaffiliated and/or no longer believing. One Sunday, one finally asked me, "Why do you still go to church? You know your parents have no idea whether you go or not, right?" It wasn't the first time that I had thought about why I still went to Mass, but it was the first time that I had to articulate thoughtfully my tradition and my commitment to it. This conversation left me looking for the right thing to say, and it sparked something deeper in me. I wanted so badly to understand my friends' perspectives. Experiences like this helped me understand the value of boundary crossing. In a divisive and polarized time, dialogue through friendship, through commitments to joint causes, and through meaningful conversations is crucially important. Boundary crossing moments have helped me learn for myself Atticus Finch's great advice to Scout in one of my favorite books, To Kill a Mockingbird. He says, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his or her point of view, until you climb into his or her skin and walk around in it." Today, in the year of St. Joseph, I want to reflect on a few ways that I have experienced St. Joseph, the boundary crosser, in my life. First, by embracing discomfort. In the book of Matthew, we hear that Joseph considers a quiet divorce from Mary when he learns that she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. It isn't until after a visit from an angel of the Lord that he decides to stay by Mary's side. Joseph could have made the decision to divorce her quietly. Even after a visit from an angel of the Lord, a nice luxury that many of us may never have, Joseph could have made the decision to walk away. Instead, he embraces the discomfort. How do we do this today? We may find groups that challenge us. We make friends with those whose viewpoints and worldviews do not match our own. And we find or we create ways to coexist. One of my favorite ecumenical experiences at Luther College occurred at an event called Desserts and Dialogue, a small event hosted between Catholic and Lutheran students. We started with a joint prayer service, and then we got to the main event, the dessert. Now, of course, the dialogue and the conversation that followed. At the beginning of the conversation, as usually happens, it was hard to get anyone to share. We'd just eaten a few delectable treats, but those treats hadn't necessarily guaranteed an easy conversation as much as we may have hoped so during the planning stages. Eventually, conversation started to pick up, as it usually and hopefully does. And I could overhear several small groups saying some version of the following: "Oh, you do that too? I had no idea." Something holy happens when we take the time to embrace discomfort. I'm doing a program at my church through Just Faith Ministries called Faith and Racial Equity, Exploring Power and Privilege. In some of the beginning sessions we heard, whenever someone feels awkward, we have to pause and recognize we are on holy ground. In another session we heard, pain and discomfort are usually the seeds for spiritual growth. Reading about the life of St. Joseph in the Bible, I'm sure that he experienced many moments of awkward discomfort. Nonetheless, his story demonstrates the holy transformation that occurs from embracing discomfort. The second way that I want to reflect on St. Joseph, the boundary crosser, in my own life is through the theme of creative courage, by finding creative courage. Two stories, I think, highlight Joseph's creative courage. First, Joseph finds a stable for Mary and eventually Jesus when no lodging was available. Second, he leaves Bethlehem for Egypt to escape Herod, who wanted to kill the child Jesus. Pope Francis writes about St. Joseph and creative courage. He says, "This emerges especially in the way we deal with difficulties, in the face of difficulty. We can either give up and walk away or somehow engage with it. At times, difficulties bring out resources we did not even think we had." This past year, we have all needed a healthy dose of creative courage. At this point, we've been living in a pandemic for a year, and still nothing is normal. Almost a year ago, exactly at about this time, I was able to participate in an event called Preparing Our Hearts for Passover and Easter, an event sponsored by Boston College, Hebrew College, Boston University, and Harvard Divinity School. This event, which brought students from a variety of different faith traditions together, particularly those of different Christian traditions and Jewish traditions, together to discuss the holidays that were just coming around the corner. We had only been living in the pandemic for almost a month at that time, and at that time, everyone had essentially made the hard decisions to cancel events. It was completely understandable, given so much of the fear and anxiety that had surrounded those early days of the pandemic. But I'm proud to say that this event, the leaders of this event, made the decision to change the format from an in-person format to a Zoom format. For I think many of the participants, this was one of the first experiences that they had outside of their own homes, outside of their own quarantine, outside of maybe some of the classes that they had been participating in. We weren't really sure how the event would go. We weren't really sure about how successful it would be or how many people would at that time elect to spend time on Zoom. And we were almost certain that there was no way that people could still have a meaningful connection without being physically present with one another. I'm happy to say that for me was one of the shining lights, especially early on in the pandemic. So many of us came from different backgrounds, from different places, and we joined together on Zoom to spend a few hours with one another. We crossed not only the personal boundaries at that point of fear or anxiety from the pandemic, but we crossed over into the virtual world with one another. We spoke about the boundaries that in some ways divide us of our different religious traditions, but even more than that, we talked about the ways in which we can come together to reflect together and to share together about the future, about how it was that we were going to be spending those holy holidays, Passover and Easter, in completely different ways than we had up to that point in our lives. There was singing, there was small group sharing, there was prayer. And all of these moments were possible only because of the creative courage of the leaders in the event. I want to share, as a way to close, a prayer that was used at that very first event. A prayer called the Blessing of Faces, a Zoom prayer. Please join me. So many beautiful faces, so many radiant souls shining forth into our hearts. Look at those eyes, the smiles, the hopes, the fears, the yearning, the questioning, the compassion, the love. Take it in. Take it all in. The tenderness, the humanity, the blessing of faces arrayed before you. The blessing of faces given and received. Our church and our world need creative courage, people who are willing to think and offer fresh solutions to old problems and keep their eyes focused on God. Creativity and courage are sure signs of the Holy Spirit. We see this embodied in the life of St. Joseph, and today we work to embody this creative courage. These are just a few of the ways that I have come to feel the transforming power of St. Joseph, the boundary crosser, in my life. I invite you to think about how Joseph, the boundary crosser, has come to be in your life. How is St. Joseph calling you to creative courage? Thank you.